Coming up next on the Living Word.
If a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to be guilty. If a child lives with tolerance, he learns to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, he learns to be confident. If a child lives with praise, he learns to appreciate. If a child lives with fairness, he learns justice. If a child lives with security, he learns to have faith. If a child lives with approval, he learns to like himself. And if a child lives with acceptance and friendship, he learns to find love in this world. What is your greatest treasure? Perhaps some would say, my portfolio is my greatest treasure. I am involved in stocks and bonds. I have savings account. That's my greatest treasure. Maybe another would say, my greatest treasure is my marriage. Perhaps some would say, the greatest treasure that I have is my health and how I appreciate my health. And it is indeed a great treasure. But on today's Living Word telecast, we discuss with you a treasure greater than either of these. Please study with us as we look at the theme, Our Greatest Treasure. Thank you very much for coming and being with us. We have a large delegation here on the first floor here at Provoke Parkway. In addition, there are more than 100 up in the balcony sitting around. At our first service this morning, we had the second largest attendance that we have had in this year, and we're very grateful for the presence of every one of you. We're also thankful to those of you that have joined us by means of television today, and I want to thank our viewing audience for making the Living Word television program the most watched program at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning of any program in the entire city and county, and we're very grateful and thankful. To God be the glory and be the praise. There are more than 30,000 people, or approximately 30,000 people, who are watching our program by means of television according to the ratings, the Nielsen ratings. And that means that for about 20 cents per person, we're able to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to those who join us by means of television. Our text for our sermon this morning is taken from the book of Ephesians, chapter number 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's the right thing that children should be obedient to their parents. It's the right way to live. It's the way to keep our society going as it should. And so the Apostle Paul said, children, you need to obey your parents because it's right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, that thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. There is an old Chinese proverb that says, one generation plants the trees and another gets the shade. You and I are living in the shade of some trees that were planted by our parents before us, by our grandparents, and perhaps even by our great-grandparents. We are shaded today to some degree by their moral standards, by their spiritual commitments, by their value system, by their sense of right and wrong, and by their commitment to duty. We are shaded by what our parents and grandparents have planted long, long ago. The question before us today is, what kind of trees are we planting? In the year 2006, what kind of trees are we planting? What kind of shade will we offer the future generation from what may be the blistering heat of an unbelieving world? Are we planting anything that will leave our children totally, are we going to leave them totally exposed? It is obvious, or it should be, to every one of us, that our culture, as far as our moral values, as far as our ethics, as far as our duty and commitment, is disintegrating in the world in which we live. I believe that there could be no argument about this, that our world today, as far as morals, as far as honesty, as far as truth and integrity, is not the world that it was some time ago. Our culture today is not very consistent. I read some time ago of some folks that just got all out of sort for the killing of 6 million roasting chickens. They were more upset, and they equated this to Hitler killing 6 million Jews in the Second World War. What kind of a culture are we living in that could have this concept? Today, there are more people in law schools than in any other graduate program in the United States of America. Sorry about that, Brother Kyle, but that's the rate. That's what the figure shows. More people are going to be lawyers than in any other graduate program in the United States of America. When there are no standards of authority, we send people to prison for killing hummingbirds, but we think nothing about suctioning a little baby out of the womb of its mother. There's something that's just not right about this. The Bible is certainly clear when it speaks about the responsibility of our young people. Listen to Psalms chapter 127, verses 3 and 4. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. I'm suggesting to you today that this verse indicates that children are a gift from God. In Genesis chapter 4, Adam had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain, and she said, I've gotten a man-child. And she said, literally, I have gotten a man-child with the Lord. In other words, the Lord has been the source of this child. In verse 25 of this same chapter, Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son, named him Seth. For God hath appointed me another offspring, she said. In Genesis chapter 20 and verse 17, and as for Ishmael, I have heard you, behold, I will bless him and make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. And he shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. And so Ishmael, God said that he was a blessing from God. This is God's blessing to that ancient family. In Genesis 29 and verse 31, the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and He opened her womb, and Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. But notice that Leah believed that her child was a blessing from God. And then later on in this same chapter, she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord hath heard me that I am unloved, He has therefore given me this son also. Children are a blessing. Children are a source of love. In the book of Ruth, chapter 4 and verse 13, Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went in unto her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said, a woman said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord. Children are a blessing from God. Is this the way you feel about children? That they are a blessing from God? That's what the Bible affirms. God gives them for our encouragement. God gives them for our joy. God gives them in order to mold and to shape our lives into what He would have them to be. The Houston Police Department published a timely little booklet called How to Ruin Your Children. Of course, it was written with tongue in cheek, but it said it is a guarantee, 99%, that your children will be ruined if you'll follow the following. Number one, begin with infancy to give the child everything he wants. Don't upset the little dear. Give him everything he wants. Number 2, when he picks up bad words, laugh at him and say, isn't he cute? He's learned these horrible, tragic words. Number 3, never give him any spiritual training until he's 21 and let him decide for himself. Oh, I'm so grateful as I look around this assembly today to see there are a lot of mothers here, and even in our first service, mothers with small children. And I know sometimes they are a little noisy than those of us that are older might appreciate, but it's like music in the eyes of God when He hears the little children as they cry. So, parents, you're doing the right thing by bringing them to the services. Number 4, a report said, never use the word wrong. It may develop a guilt feeling in them. And number 5, if he pick up everything he leaves lying around, so he will be experienced in throwing all responsibilities aside. Beloved, I'm saying to you that here are some rules that some people are rearing their children by that indeed are devastating. I want to go back to our text. I preached this sermon the first service, and I only got about halfway through. So those of you that are monitoring and using the screen, you may have a little difficulty keeping up, but I want to go down to the text to find out how to raise the child that is right. We've seen some suggestions about how to do it the wrong way. Now, what are the right ways? What does God tell us to do? Well, the text says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you, that you may live long upon the earth. Children are to honor and to obey. Obedience is an act, and honor is an attitude. Children, obey your parents. Children, honor your parents. It's not enough just to do what your parents tell you to do. The very attitude is involved if you're going to follow the will of God. And the rolling of the eyes and the sneer on the face will not cut it. And you're not doing what God wants. Now, you may come to services every Sunday. I'm talking now especially to teenagers. You may come to services every Sunday that the doors of the meeting house are open, every service. And yet, when you are disrespectful of your parents, you're not doing what God says. In the estimation of God, you're violating His holy and divine Word. Well, we want our children to be obedient, and we want our children to honor us. If you want to prevent rearing the kind of children that we've been talking about that are wayward and contrary to the will of God, we need to develop children in 4 areas as outlined in Luke chapter 2 and verse 52. The Bible says Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. He grew in wisdom, that's mentally, and we want our children to grow up mentally. He grew in stature, that's physically, and some of you have spent tons of money to be sure that your children are developing physically correctly. And in favor with God, and that's spiritually. Thanks be to those of you that bring your children to services, that have them in a Bible class every Sunday. You're doing what God would want you to do. And then with man, and that of course would be socially. Honor means the spirit of obedience. Obedience means the act itself. In Proverbs 3 verse 11, my son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord, or loathe His reproof. For whom the Lord loves, He reproves, even as a father the son in whom He delights. When your father places some prohibition upon you, when your father gives you some instruction and tells you you're not to do this, the Bible says that that's because that father delights in the child. In Proverbs 10 and verse 13, any father who really loves and delights in his son will discipline him. And this verse says that a rod is for the back of him who lacks understanding. In chapter 19 and 18 of Proverbs, discipline your son while there is hope, because there is coming a time when there will be no hope. Are you aware of that? If you fail to discipline your son, and that word discipline means to train and to mold and to shape, Are you aware of the fact that there's going to be a time when you will not be able to do so? Now there is hope. Do it while there is hope, because there's coming a time when there will be no hope. Well, there, of course, can be times when there is no hope. Proverbs 19 and verse 10 says, discipline your son while there is hope. Your son gets too old for you to chasten him with the rod that the writer of Proverbs mentioned. He'll take that rod away from you and beat you over the head with it. Discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his death. In other words, if you do not discipline your son and offer him hope, then he says you're desiring his death. He'll grow up to be a drug addict, and he'll die of an overexposure. Or he'll grow up to be an alcoholic, and maybe at the age of 19 will run his car into a tree or a wall somewhere and kill himself. He'll grow up to be a homosexual, and he'll die at age 25 because of the disease called AIDS. And he'll grow up to be a criminal, and the end, he will be killed. No, he said, you discipline that son while there is hope. The alternative of the discipline of the son while there is hope is desire of his death. This is what the wise man Solomon said. In Proverbs 22 and verse 15, foolishness is bound in the heart of the child. Foolishness is bound up in the heart. The rod of discipline will remove it far away from him. Proverbs 23, do not hold back discipline from the child. Although you beat him with a rod, he will not die. Now, I'm not advocating abuse today. All of us would loathe such action as that. But I think most of us would say that we've erred on the other side, that many are growing up in a home where there is no discipline at all. Proverbs 22 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. There's a way that God intends you to train that child, and you're to train that child up in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not abandon it. In Proverbs 29 and verse 17, correct your son, and your daughter certainly is implied in this passage. Correct your son or daughter, and he will give you comfort, and he will delight in your soul. Let's look specifically at what Paul states in Ephesians 6 and verse 4. First, from the negative perspective. He said, do not provoke your children to anger. And positively, he says, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. You don't have to be a child psychologist to figure this out. You don't have to go to 1,000 seminars or buy all the books on the shelves in order to understand this principle. Now, Paul was speaking in a world where children were severely abused and where children were unwanted. And today, there are many children that are severely abused, and certainly they are unwanted. But let me tell you something. The greatest abuse that a child can receive is not physical abuse. The greatest abuse that a child can receive today is for that child simply to be left all alone. You throw your child away when you do not spend time with your child, when you do not bring your children up in the nurture and the instruction of the Lord. You throw that child away. We're living in a throwaway child society, aren't we? Verse 4 says, the word father, fathers, he says. It's the word pater. There are two Greek words. One is the word pater. The other is the word mater. Pater meaning the father, mater meaning the mother. But sometimes the word pater in the Bible includes both the mother and the father. For example, in Hebrews 11 and 23, where it talks about the pater of Moses, and he addresses both the mother and the father there. They both saw that he was a goodly child, and they both hid him among the bulrushes, and they both were in harmony about how this child should be brought up. To try to give some practical lessons, a few years back, two psychologists at the Harvard University identified the factors in predicting futures of a delinquent child ages 5 or 6. One, the father must do the discipline. And that discipline must be firm, it must be fair, and it must be consistent. It must be firm discipline. Not laughing at Johnny's ugly words. It must be fair discipline, and it must be consistent. Not discipline when you're angry, when you don't feel well yourself, when things are not going good on your job, but it must be consistent. Second, the mother's supervision. That's the word, the mother's supervision. The mother knows where they are at all times. She knows what they're doing at all times. She's involved in their lives personally, and she continues to supervise them. In her presence, she controls them, and when they're out of her presence, she knows where they are and what they're doing and who they're with. The third factor said to guarantee against a future dysfunctional child is that father and mother need to demonstrate affection before them. The father and the mother need to love each other, and their children need to know that they love one another, and that there will be a healthy response when this is prevalent. They will have the feeling of secure, and though they live in an unloving world, they will know that they live in their home in a world of love. And then number 4 is the family cohesiveness. Time that we spend together is so vital and so important. M.D. Myers said the key to right parent-child relationship can be summed up in 5 things. Number 1, love, parents loving each other and loving their children. Number 2, set a standard of making people live by that standard or pay the consequences of failure. Number 3 is consistency. And number 4 is to always set the right kind of example before them. But negatively, he says, do not provoke your children to anger. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean you're never to make little Johnny mad or little Susie mad? Well, of course not. It means far more than that. The word provoke is only used twice. It has the idea of deep irritation. It has the concept of intense anger underneath, exasperating them, embittering them, disheartening them, so that they become totally frustrated and angry. Well, how do you do that? May I make a couple of suggestions? Number 1, by overprotecting your children. If you really want to frustrate your children, fence them in and don't ever trust them, and don't give them opportunity for self-development and self-decisions. Number 2, you can provoke your children by showing favoritism. Favor one child over another child, and let one child know that he is loved more than the others, and let the other children know that you love. Look what happened in the case of Joseph in the Old Testament, and how his brothers were embittered against him, and how they even sought his life. Then by pushing achievement. Never be satisfied with what your children are doing. If they get C's, demand B's. If they get B's, you demand A's. And you keep on, demanding, so that nothing satisfies you. One child brought home a report card. Everything on the report card was A except one B. And guess where the parent sent it in? You can do better than that. I'm ashamed of you. Another way you can exasperate your child is by overindulgence. Give them everything they want. Everything that you possibly can, you give that to the child. Have you noticed at Christmas, when they get so many different toys, but maybe there was one toy that was overlooked, or maybe another sibling got a particular toy that they like, and how sometimes they can become so angry. And so don't overindulge your child. And then another way is to make them bitter is by discouragement. Just remind them all the time, you're not going to amount to anything. Tell them all the time, you're going to amount, you could do better. You're never going to amount to anything in this life. Another way is to make them feel that they are an intrusion in your life. Leave them all the time. Make them fend for themselves. Make them fix their own meals and never have any time for them. Another way to provoke your child to wrath is by failing to allow them to grow up. By not ever allowing them to make mistakes and profit by their own mistakes. And then by neglect. The story of David as he neglected his son Absalom. And look what happened to him. Another way is by bitter words and physical cruelty. Physical cruelty ought to be obvious. Bitter words may not be as obvious. Your tongue is much sharper than the tongue of your child. You know more words than he does. Your brain is functioning better than his at this stage of life. And so you can tear him apart with your tongue. Be careful especially about that. And then one simple thing is that you simply need to live the right kind of example before him. In closing today, I want to suggest to you the following, and that is, if a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If a child lives with shame, he learns to be guilty. If a child lives with tolerance, he learns to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, he learns to be confident. If a child lives with praise, he learns to appreciate. If a child lives with fairness, he learns justice. If a child lives with security, he learns to have faith. If a child lives with approval, he learns to like himself. And if a child lives with acceptance and friendship, he learns to find love in this world. Let us never forget, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Today we have looked at the instruction to children to be obedient to their parents. We have looked at instructions to mom and dads, how that they are to teach their children in the ways of God. What a great joy it is for us to see our children as they grow up loving the Lord, as they grow physically and mentally, as they grow spiritually, and as they grow in the concepts that God would have them so to do. We thank you so much for joining us as we've talked today about our great treasure, our children. Until next week at this same time, may God's richest blessings be yours.
The Living Word is brought to you by the Roebuck Parkway Church of Christ in Birmingham, Alabama. The church is located at exit 134 just off Interstate 59. Our Sunday worship services are at 8 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 6 p.m. We also meet at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. If you would like more information about today's program, please write to the Living Word, 400 Roebuck Parkway, Birmingham, Alabama, 35206. You can also get more information about this program and our congregation on the internet at www.thegospelspeaks.com. Thank you for watching today's program, and may God's richest blessings be yours.